Hey subscribers, working on the 1986 Chevy K20 plow truck. After the previous video we had some badness happen. Both axle shafts broke on the front axle. I don't know how. So I have a donor 10 bolt from a half-ton Chevy that I previously rebuilt for a old beater truck I had, all new bearings, axle joints, whatnot. So I'm gonna steal the shafts out of it. Now this video will be the same for a K20 or a K10. Both axles are identical other than the lug pattern. I already got this side apart before I started to make a video. Thought it'd be a good idea since some people might not know how to do this. You do need a couple special tools in order to take these axles apart. First off is a 4-pin spindle nut wrench, just like that one. And this guy makes your life very easy. It's an OTC tool, 7502. And what this does is it screws on the end of the spindle, and you use a slide hammer and it pulls it out of here rather than beating on the spindle with a hammer. That's how this spindle was when I took it apart. So I'm going to replace it with one of these spindles that I took apart with this tool to make life easier. This is the spindle I was talking about. You can see the hammer strike marks and a bunged up thread on it, which is no good. So I'll just take one of those, which I know is good, and put it in here. I'm assuming the other side will be just as destroyed, but I won't know until I get it apart. So the first step in taking your hubs apart is you need a 3/8 Allen key to remove the 2 Allen head bolts that hold the brake caliper on. Fortunately for me, somebody put new brake calipers on this and never seized up the bolts. So it comes apart nice. These bolts don't come out with the Allen key. You can take a pair of vice grips and clamp them onto the head. There's plenty of room to get on there with some pliers and get them out that way. You just need a little pry bar to pry off the calipers. This is the one I found while plowing with the 60 a couple weeks ago. I threw it in this truck, thought it'd be kind of handy, and it's turned out to be quite useful. Alright, now with the caliper out of the way, you need a 9/64 Allen key, and that fits these 6 bolts that hold the lockout on. So I'll remove these guys now. And with those bolts removed, the twisty lock parts comes off. Now you're going to need a set of snap ring pliers to remove the snap ring on the end of the axle shaft. Now you need a pick like this to remove this other snap ring from the inside. Got to find the end and just stick it underneath and pop it out, just like so. And to remove the internal portion of the locking hub, just take 2 of the screws and pull it out just like that, which now exposes your outer spindle nut. The spindle nut wrench is also an OTC, and the part number is 7270, and fits on there just like so. The outer spindle nut's on there pretty tight, so I used a 1/2-inch ratchet to pop it free. And that is on there tight because that's a locking nut. There's a washer in between, a special washer between the outer one and the inner one to keep the inner one from spinning. You'll need that pick again to remove your spindle nut. Now, I don't know if you guys can see, but there's a washer in there with a bunch of holes, and those holes line up with a pin on the inner spindle nut. Need that pick again to work out the washer. Previous one on the other side I could not get out because of that messed up thread, so I ended up taking a air hammer with a chisel and snapping it in half. This one actually came out. Give you a better view of what it looks like. So there's a groove on the spindle that notch sits in to keep everything from rotating. Now the inner spindle nut shouldn't be that tight. but if somebody cranked these up on this truck, you just need a ratchet to pop it free. All that one does is set the preload on the Timken bearings in there. Here's the inner spindle nut. There's the little pin I was talking about that lines up the holes in the retaining washer. So now the easy part, just slide the hub off. You got to be careful because the outside wheel bearing will just fall right off if you're not careful onto the ground. So I always try to keep it tipped up slightly, just like so. Now I always like to wipe off the spindle, the rag, to remove all the grease, because when you're rattling these 6 nuts off, they're 9/16 by the way, a bunch of debris will fall on here, and it's just easier if it's clean. It's always a good idea to spray some penetrating oil on these as well. They usually get pretty crusty. On this side, they're pretty nice. Looks like somebody never sees them at one point. Alright, now with those 6 nuts removed, you just need a club to break free the backing plate. Now, you use the special tool, thread it right on the end of the spindle. Now this tool is designed to work on a Dana 30, a Dana 44, which is basically what a 10 bolt is, and a Dana 60. And yep, this one's been apart previously. Look at all the never sees. And that one popped free relatively easily. The other side I had to wail on it for some time to get it out. And with the spindle off, you can just grab a hold of the stub shaft and pull it out. In my case, the U-joints are broken, so there's not a whole lot to grab. Typically the whole shaft would come out. This one has a broken ear on it, so it's going to be a little difficult to get out of there. Since I'm working outside and it's a little breezy, I don't want a bunch of sand and grit to get in all these parts, so I've been laying them inside on some paper from shipping, and I labeled each side so I know where they came from. I'm probably going to replace both spindles from the ones on the other axle when I get it apart, since they both have hammer marks on them. And I need some spindle nuts for the driver's side since they were pretty well destroyed. I have no idea what happened to that side, but somebody was not happy with it. So just a little side note, if you have a greasable U-joint, you have to remove the grease fitting from the U-joint in order to pull the shaft out. It's that tight of a fit to get it out. Just this flathead screwdriver is all you need. Now it's just as easy as pulling that out. Walking right over here. And sliding it back in. Sometimes you got to give it a little jiggle to get the splines to line up. So a little bit of a terminology lesson. This little rubber piece here is called the spindle seal. And inside here you'll see a needle bearing. That's the spindle bearing, it's called. The axle shaft rides on it right here. So typically I would replace all this while I have the truck apart, because normally they're bad and people tend to overlook them. But I replaced them on these spindles when I rebuilt that other 10 bolt. So I'm just going to run them. They're in good shape. One other thing is, it's a good idea to put some never sees on all of this because it gets quite rusty as you can see. So just to make it easier to come apart the next time, like say your axle U-joints go bad from lack of grease, because nobody ever seems to grease them. And now when I put the spindle on, I like to orient the slot right here facing up. Just makes it easier when you're trying to align everything. Don't forget to put the grease fitting back in to grease your axle U-joint. You'll be very mad when you get all this work done and you forget to put that in, and a bunch of gunk gets in there and destroys your nice new axle U-joints. Now when tightening down these 6 nuts, you want to do them evenly. You don't want to draw one down all the way, because you got to draw the spindle into the knuckle even, since it's kind of a tight fit. Helps if you're going the right way too with the impact gun. Now since I wiped all the grease off the spindle, it's important to put a little bit of grease right where the hub seal rides. You never want to put a seal together dry. You're just asking for trouble. Now that we're all lubed up, time to slide the hub back on. Remember that outer hub bearing's just sitting in there, so you don't want that falling back into the dirt. So now I'm just going to use my pick to get that outer bearing in place. It's also a good time to repack your wheel bearings, but these were nice and greasy, so I skipped that step. Sometimes it's easier to use your spindle nut wrench. And there we have it. I just take my pick and put it in one of the slots and just spin it around. Brings it up faster than using the spindle nut wrench. At this point, we have to set the preload, which is very important. You don't want to burn up the wheel bearings being too tight, and you don't want them too loose, because then they'll rock back and forth, and that's no good either. So what I like to do is just spin it, tighten it, you also want to feel for backlash, which this one's still pretty loose. Now I'm at the point where I need to put the ratchet on it. And I've done this so much, I can do it by feel. Just want to wiggle it around and make sure you have no play. Feels pretty good. Might have to play with that one a little bit to get the spindle nut washer lined up with the hole, or the pin rather. There we go. Got it lined up. Feels pretty good. Now this outer spindle nut can get cranked on there. I'm sure there's a torque spec but I like to go with the German one, good and tight. Got the internal locking hub piece in. Now I'm just gonna put the snap ring back in. Now, notice the end of the axle shaft is not sticking out far enough. You just reach into the knuckle and give it a push to expose those splines. Sometimes you gotta mess with everything, especially if you have a new spindle seal in there. The rubber likes to compress a whole bunch. And there, I think we're together. Now I just gotta put those 6 Allen head screws back in, and this side is done. Got the other side together, and since I've been touching the rotors with my greasy hands, it's a good time to just hit them with some brake clean before installing the calipers. Well, it's all back together, and I'm gonna go take a test drive in it. So if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe down below, and I'll catch you later.